Valentina Palacios. I'm a master's candidate of the strategic design and management, and also the research assistant of the DIT lab. Before I started my master's in Parsons, I also was the founder of a social enterprise called The Handbags, where I co-created making handbags alongside with over 100 indigenous women across all Colombia, where I'm originally from. And I'm excited to be the host for today's session, the first session of La Hora, organized by the DIT Lab, a space where students and lifelong learners will gather monthly to talk about the artisan sector, craft, art, design, entrepreneurship, social impact, and more. So thank you so much for giving us 1 hour of your time to talk about the most urgent topics of the artisan sector and to collaborate with us, brainstorming some ideas on how can we reimagine the current models between the artisan sector to better prioritize the future of artisans and their children over sales and profit. Not being more, I will pass it over to Cynthia, who I believe doesn't need an introduction, but those who might don't know her, she is the lab director and also who co-founded the lab in 2007, and the main reason why we are here today. Cynthia will be giving us a quick introduction on the DIT lab and the most critical research questions our lab has focused the attention over the years. So Cynthia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you all for being here to help us kick off our first La Hora. Excited to finally get these monthly gatherings off the ground. They've been an idea of the lab for a couple of years, and I appreciate Valentina's partnership and energy in making this happen. So a bit about the DIT Lab. We're a lab, we were founded in 2007. We focus on the artisan sector. We look at, we've done our own research through fieldwork programs. We also have strategic partnerships and we do academic research. And our focus is really on thinking about these 3 parts, let's say these 3 lenses of poverty alleviation, artisan empowerment, and cultural heritage. The reason why we think it's important for a design school like Parsons to focus on the artisan sector is because for 2 reasons. It's the 2nd largest employer in the world. It's valued at $526 billion every year. And yet the majority of the world's artisans live in poverty and are otherwise marginalized. Furthermore, many of these artisans have now turned to needing to make a living through their participation in the fashion industry, and up to 60% of garment production is now done in homes, which is a really striking statistic. So some of the questions that guide our lab's work, we're not going to answer or discuss all of these today, but in future La Horas, we can return to these and absolutely follow your interests. We're interested in what does it mean to preserve culture? Is this even possible? What if universities played a central role in preservation of craft? What if artisans were compensated and celebrated as teachers of their knowledge and not necessarily as people who produce things that are sold? Are these gig economy based solutions fair? The majority of the solutions that we see out there have models where artisans are paid by piece. And this can be understood within what is now understood as gig economy. What you see here, some of the findings in a fair craft study we did a few years back. Other questions: what if artisan enterprises really led the conversation about transparency in the supply chain? What if you, maybe there are founders here in the room, were 100% transparent with regards to cost and labor? What kind of impact could that have? We see a lot of these kinds of examples. Mercado Global's annual report where they share how the money that they're raising is being distributed. But what are other ways in which we could imagine transparency? We're preoccupied by how we may also be gatekeeping with this question of who gets to call themselves designers. There's a kind of othering. I am a designer. I have the education, the degree, the privileges. Somebody else who maybe makes amazing things doesn't get to call themselves a designer. So this question of designer, the power and the politics around the term is very interesting, because we see that artisans are neither respected nor treated nor compensated as designers are. And what is that issue, and what role are we playing in that conversation? Furthermore, how might the role of the designer in the artisan sector be reimagined? As we'll be discussing today, the designer seems to be a connector to markets, but what other value, what additional value can a designer bring to artisans in their work? In this handbook published by Artesanías de Colombia, UNESCO, and Craft Revival Trust, they really state designers are an interface between tradition and modernity. Is that sufficient? Is that really the role that we want to be playing? Is this really why we go to design school, to be the connector between products and markets? My slides just froze. Oops. Other questions. What if artisans receive royalties on adapted designs based on their craft? We hear artisans say, yeah, people tell us that their work is inspired from our designs, but that doesn't give us much. It gives us maybe brand recognition, does it? Would a royalty model be of interest? Organizations like Cultural Intellectual Property are exploring some very interesting projects around this particular question. And most recently, and finally, our current questions with Valentina, we're currently working on a paper looking at how might the so-called human-centered design process, or also known as design thinking process, conform to indigenous frameworks of space and time. How do we really invert that? Who needs to conform to what kind of frameworks? What would that look like? And then today's driving question of today's La Hora is how might we support artisans via non-commerce-based solutions? Why do we want to do that? We want to do that because researchers in anthropology are showing that global markets introduced to indigenous and artisan communities, they're not only not alleviating poverty, they're leading to deeper impoverishment of artisans and to the loss of cultural traditions, which goes counter to the rationale that many founders share with us of why they started the work in the first place. Quick example of this is a stall in Chichicastenango in Guatemala. It's seen in many towns across that country. Artisans come here, they purchase one of these pieces of paper, which are color photocopies of designs published in a book by a woman either from the US or from Europe. And so this creates a homogenization and a loss of creativity across indigenous pattern and design in Guatemala. Is this really us helping, or are we causing a loss of culture and traditions? And finally, and maybe as later as we go into discussion, really keep in mind the work of Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar, who invites us to really understand and acknowledge that the only way that we can get out of a crisis is to explore it through a world that didn't generate it. So we cannot exit the crises with the categories of the world that created them in the first place. And that really causes a different, and really challenges us to think about the world in a different way. So let me pass it back to Valentina to share a bit more about the specifics of today's exploration.
Okay, so thank you so much for your presentation, Cynthia. It was really insightful to see all the questions that the lab has focused the attention. So this is the current model we are seeing, like not only the current case study we are working at the lab, but through like many other cases we have had the opportunity to like see and be an observant of the process. There is a craft, there is a designer, and then like because of that they get to achieve an international market, or they have the possibility to see trends and collaborate together. Can you pass it over to the next? So here is what we are seeing. So the designers are in the middle as an intermediary of the process. So there is a craft, they promise better wages, more stability. And also they say because that co-creation between designers and craft, they are going to create something that is like the preservation of a traditional techniques. And the majority of them call this process the new luxury, because when they have the designers and the artisans co-creating together, there is like a new product that becomes more desirable for that market. How do they do it? They do it under like this kind of structure where it's like an organized structure. They also create something like similar than I think like we saw in the SDM with Corai's class, or is a division of labor, where they kind of like optimize the time of our artisans across the different processes that need to be done in production. And they say there is a price transparency for artisans. They create like an information where designers tell also the artisans like where is the amount of money they are going to pay and how much is what the market is actually paying for the product. Also, they have something called consciousness around natural resources. One, like this is like more specifically to one of the cases we are studying currently, where the organization realized that a lot of the indigenous communities work with resources that are like natural resources, and therefore there is a trend of like that those natural resources, because the populations where they live are extremely dry or have other conditions where the natural resources they were 50 years from now are no longer available because of climate change or other circumstances. And they call this the prosperity chain. So they say there is like a horizontal exchange of knowledge between the artisans and founder, and they also kind of like install capabilities between the artisans where they can manage better their time. They do participatory design, co-design, and they create new symbols. This is also one of the like main trends that we see in the industry. It's like they are not a preservation of their own symbols, because there is like so much respect that also that can be a potential trend that can happen in the future. Also, we see that there is therefore they can access, like artisans or the craft can access to international markets, and because the ability that designers have to see trends. But what happens if we assume that the best solution is commerce-based? Then what is the way forward that doesn't rely on intermediaries? So let's say we are designers that are like just designing the system, but not actually participating in the day-to-day. So for one side, we have the craft, for the other one, we have the market. So there will be better wages because there will be less intermediary. There will be more stability because also they will have access to international markets, and they will have themselves the ability to see the trends. The production will be based on consumer needs and not under designer preferences. So that means like perhaps there is also like is more sustainable in terms of like there is not going to be any stock that is going to be made without a consumer need. Everything is going to be actually consumed. How that happens? That happens through a co-design with the client. There is also going to be preservation of traditional techniques, but at the same time preservation of culture and symbols. There is going to be a price transparency for artisans, and which is also really important is that clients know exactly how much goes back to the artisans. And what happened, like if instead of like us, that way, like the artisans will then be only calling artisans, they are also artists. They will be artists. So, and what is like also really important is like we will give them back the power to manage their own natural resources. We a lot of times like think like we can save everything, and we are just like giving them like here we are empowered them to like use the natural resources the same way they have been using it for many generations before, until we start like creating this system where we are enabling with a different market. So the main barriers we found was the lack of education in time management. Also, there are other complications regarding the conditions, like not only political, but also in terms of like the geographic of the communities that create other problems with like access to resources and even careers. Like how am I going to get to a client if the territories where I'm located like doesn't have access to like a FedEx office, to like any other courier where like I can ship my product to the final customer. There is a lack of financial literacy. So that means like it's difficult for these communities to even access to credit. There is a complete lack on the banks. and they don't have bank accounts. So like, how are artisans even going to like get paid for their work? How is that transaction going to be made? The sector heavily relies on elderly artisans, and this is created mostly because there is a lack of a incentive for sharing the wisdom. So whoever is like actually cultivating the culture is not being rewarded in any form. So how can we actually create this? And also to mention other ones, there are like communication difficulties, there are like poor reception, not only of phones, but also in internet. So like if they are going to access to like a community that is like even in another country, how are they going to communicate with them? And in terms of languages, the majority of the population that like work in the artisan sector speak like languages that are like not widely spread. So the other one is the dual roles, and I think like Cynthia also mentioned in the conversation that like 60% of the handicraft work in the world gets made in homes. So like they also have to be responsible for being moms, like mothers, and like encounter other responsibilities that are related to home. So this is like what we are going to propose in this session, is like how we can imagine like new models. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Tanvi, who I'm delighted to introduce. She's also a master's candidate of the Strategic Design and Management program, and who responded to our call. She's going to show us her project and experience with artisans. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Valentina, for the amazing presentation and the opportunity to share my experience with the artisan sector. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project I worked in 2019 during my undergrad, and I have been going back to refine it as I'm learning different things at Parsons. So I'm just going to quickly get into it. So the artisan that I'm going to be talking about today is Sajnuben Panchanbai Rabari. She's an embroidery artisan in Kutch. She lives in Kukarsar, Kutch, India, and she has been migrating up till 2009. She went to a Kala Raksha, a school for artisan, practicing her craft for the last 35 years. So let's talk about some of the restrictions she had. Communication barrier being the first and the most important. She only talks in her local language, which is Kutchi Gujarati. She can't read and write. Lack of awareness about technology. Can't travel at the moment due to family restrictions. And she lives around 2 hours away from the main city. Lack of awareness about her in the market. And can't understand design preferences. So the observations that I did after spending 20 days with her, some of them were that she understands alphabets and numbers as designs or icons. So what I mean by that is she looks at the precision of the alphabet or number to be able to tell what exactly it is, what time it is, who is calling her, what is written, or whatever of that sort. She is extremely motivated to work, but only from home. And she is unaware about the market. However, she understands customer taste. And since she has a design background, and she has gone to a design school, she does understand design principles as well. So what is her customer journey right now? To understand why exactly the problem is, I actually delved into what exactly the customer is going through. So the customer gets a WhatsApp, and she tells Judy Bain, her mentor, to call the customer. They send her a product, which could be a denim jacket or a tote bag, and she embroiders whatever she feels like on it. She sends the product back, and that is her journey. So what are these problems that she's facing in this process? That she's becoming a lady for the finishing of the product, and the customer does not know what to expect, and that's why they are unsatisfied by the end of the process. So the problem areas that I understood her from this is like some of them are branding her, reducing the communication gap, and storytelling about her. So when I asked her what her problem area she thought was most important, she said reducing the communication gap would be the first and the most important, but even telling people about her would really help. So from all the problems that I understand and from my observations, I came up with a how might we statement. How might we use storytelling to eliminate the communication gap by thereby making her products more accessible to the audience? So one day I actually came up with an idea that what if it was a customizable catalog? What if it was communicating all the design preferences? And I realized that she understands alphabets and numbers. So what if she communicates through code? So the idea behind the code would be that every alphabet would be a product, every number would be a design, and every shape would be a color, just the way she does it on WhatsApp. So the colors would be emoticons. Together, the customer would look at this and put it all together to create a code. So now her customer journey would be that they go to Irfan Bhai's shop, which is one of her very close friends and a very big artisan in India, or she gets a WhatsApp. She sends the catalog and replies with a code. She makes the product from scratch, sends out for delivery, and the customer satisfies and sends the PDF to their friends and family to spread the word. So once I came up with the idea, I quickly decided to test it. The way I decided to test it is to do match the column to understand if she can recognize similar codes and to do a small prototype of what the book would be. And while I did that, I understood that when I was actually doing match the column, I had had written the entire match the column. So she was not understanding because she was looking at the precision of each letter. So first she did not be able to, and I failed. But when I actually printed it out, she did it perfectly fine. So this is what the product looks like. So the idea behind this entire book is very simple. Remember when we were children, we used to imagine animal faces, looking at the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Putting it all together, we would imagine what the face would actually look like. Similarly, the customer would be able to imagine the product. So this is the one would be a product, a eye would be a design, and a shape would be the color. These are some of the pictures from my experience in Kutch in 2019. And one thing I learned from this entire process is we can't always fit them in our system. We should build a system around them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanvi. That was so inspiring. And like the way you just like came with that solution and like even just adapt according to what it wasn't working was amazing. Like just printing and that was the solution. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Now, I will open it to like questions for the public. Is there any questions? And I'm also going to share like one exercise that I have here in a mural, what I want you to invite to like co-create together after having been inspired by Tanvi and also like have heard all the questions that we have researched throughout the years in the Deep Lab.
Should we take questions now? There's a question from Polo, or should we wait, Valentina?
Yeah, Paul, if you are ready, we can take your question now. Yes.
Awesome. I can even wait for the end, whichever works better.
You can go ahead.
I guess my question was, because I'm doing this research within the artisan sector, and one of the big issues that's coming up is their reliance on middlemen. And it's ironic that the more they're exploited, the more power imbalance is being created. the more reliant they're getting on them. You would assume that it's going to have an opposite effect, but it actually does not. They're getting even more reliant because of, the power imbalance. There's this, if they have fear, there's a lot going on, a lot at play. So I guess my question is, do you propose that middlemen can still be a part of this? I don't think we can ever take them away, but do you think there's a future where the middlemen are actually uplifting them and not just caring about the money? Or is there a way that we cannot have middlemen at all and try to tackle it from that angle? So I would love the opinions of you all.
I mean, I'll jump in. Of the organizations that we have studied in the Deed Lab and the case studies that we've written, we see that the equity and fairness for the artisan breaks after a certain scale. So when we see a designer founder start small with one artisan who maybe brings along their relatives or one community of 10 people, that designer founder has a connection to the gift show in New York or a particular boutique or a store in Amsterdam or, whatever it may be. That seems to work really well. What we also see is inevitably, because capitalism, there's this influence from external people who want to either invest on the designer founder's organization, or maybe the designer founder is ready to move on to another project, or the designer founder themselves wants to increase the scale of what they're doing with the hypothesis that that will bring about greater social impact. And that's where we see that the scaling is done at the expense of artisan wages, typically. Artisan wages, artisan voice, leadership, empowerment. We see decisions, for example, successful organization gets a big order from a large corporation to meet the demands of the timeline and the scale of production needed. They then invite the artisans to do away with their techniques, and they introduce new techniques into the community, new ways, new machines, new looms, different kinds of looms, different kinds of ways of going about the craft. So it's like, why are we doing this? Now we're setting up a factory. And a question we've been preoccupied at the lab is also, at what point are we just talking about factories that maybe have more beautiful images around them, but they're similarly exploitative in the way that there's so much media against, for example, sweatshops. So the intermediaries, so we use the word middlemen or middle people. There's often a negative connotation about them. I absolutely think that artisans are empowered enough to make their own decisions. And I worry about the exploitation that is so visible to many of us who are looking at the artisan sector from the outside. I think middle people can absolutely serve a purpose. And where we are focusing our attention in our case study initiatives, and I'll put a link on the chat so you all can see what we've published so far, is really trying to find what are those artisan-led, artisan-founded organizations. And this may be a segue to what Valentina showed there. What happens if we get rid of the intermediaries? Suddenly all the value goes into the community. So I think part of it is, why are we doing this? What is the problem we're trying to solve? We don't use the word help in the Deed Lab, but who are we trying to help? And yeah, I've yet to see sustainable models that don't rely on a lot of volunteer work, a lot of pro bono work, there are a lot of awesome people in the artisan sector who take on this work also as a second career. They've already built a career. They have the resources now to really invest in a very thoughtful and careful way and in a very artisan-centric way. But otherwise, I do also see and worry about founder burnout because this work can be very emotional. And so when an organization says to me or to us in the lab, oh yeah, no, here's how we're doing it, and it's going well. The two questions that we ask are, one, do the artisans get a consistent wage around the year? Or is it like a freelance gig-based model, which has no social security or infrastructure around it? And the second one is, are you paying yourself sustainably? And often the founders are the last ones to get paid. And that's only sustainable, as an academic project or once you already have capital that you can rely on. Otherwise, it kind of breaks.
Okay, so I can start by sharing the mural link, and I think that will be also an exercise what I hope encourage more participants to have more questions and even come with some ideas, raw ideas about how can we resolve it. And I think one important aspect to take under consideration regarding what Polo was saying is maybe we are the middleman, but we don't have to be participant across all the process. For example, one solution of that is what Tanvi was showing us. We design part of the system, just giving them and empowering them with the capabilities to keep doing it. I see there is another question. So Maria, do you wanna go?
Hi, thank you for sharing. Thank you for all the problems that you brought up. And I'm very curious. So you mentioned lack of education, geographic location, lack of trust in financial institutions, and maybe literacy there. And I wonder if there's a possibility to explore somehow involvement of younger generation in this area, creating this awareness of this craft, of why it is important nowadays, why is it important in their community, and basically somehow to incentivize these young people to help out, not help out, but to be involved in this process. Because elderly, you also mentioned that this is heavily dependable on elderly people, they care in these traditions. So maybe in that case, they would be more see people, young people from their communities as trustworthy people. People who might explain them how to use a credit card to pay with phone, or people who could explain them how to use internet, or help them out with shipping. But at the same time, really create this incentive for young people, maybe grants, maybe incubators, maybe marketplaces to involve them, to interest them. And wages, of course, sustainable wages for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if can you guys see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I was just starting to try to create a little bit of what you were talking. I think that's part of what can be the solution. Just how can we create those systems where young people from the community can be involved into the art and help just reduce those gaps regarding communication, regarding technology, and how can we create incentives, right? Because in order for us to ask them for engagement, we also need to give incentives for them.
And such a great contribution, Maria, as I was also answering Caroline's question in the chat regarding communication and could involving younger members of the community be helpful? So there's, two ways of doing that.
I think a little thing that I would want to add to the question, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I think more than there being a third party to Shambhavi's question being involved, or even about teaching, getting young people involved, I think there is lack of awareness that these things exist. And that gives them, the third person, the higher power that, okay, they can take over the entire bit of the system, where because they are unaware, they'll be like, I'll take care of it, you just create the product. So a lot of companies started like hiring artisans under them, saying that they're taking artisans in bulk and they're making them do the work, where they're just paying them a wage where they deserve much more than what actually the product, like the wage they're paying for, because of the product they're selling. So I think a lot of awareness factor about like the artisan being aware of like what exactly is happening is kind of missing.
Thank you, Tanvi.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nina,
And
you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just had a comment that I wanted to say. I agree with everyone what they've been saying. And then when I was looking at the 2 questions below, like in the black box, Valentina, sorry, I'm not sure if you can zoom out. Those, I was just looking at those and kind of thinking about like getting younger, like younger generations involved, and kind of, and also increasing the communication gap. I feel like if it's possible, depending on the area where the artisans come from and like what's kind of prevalent there. But I feel like social media also could be a good tool to kind of bring about the brand awareness for their artisanal skills, and if not, if they have storefronts and like kind of what they're doing. But then also younger generations, like the Gen Z generation, is so tuned into like the environmental crisis, and they're very much into kind of like getting one of a kind pieces, and they're all about like, you know, thrifting. But I think on that same level, they can get kind of one of a kind pieces from artisans as well. So I think having younger generations to kind of help them with that, like I feel like that could be a good system in place, because I know you were saying that the customers, there was communication between the customers and the artisans of what they want. And I feel like, you know, younger generations are very much engaged in different forms of social media and very much voice like what their opinions are and whether they like certain things and don't like certain things. But then they could also then showcase what they're getting, be like, hey, I got this from this cool, you know, artisan. And it's also very much makes it feel like it's one of a kind. And I think it's all kind of about like personalization and customization too. So I think that could kind of help solve for like a couple of the issues within.
perfect. Yeah, I just added here, like, I think that's a really good point. Like, since they have access to social media, perhaps they are going to even be more aware regarding climate change issues.
Yeah, and I think it can also bring about awareness for the artisans and kind of showing their customers what all that they can do and their whole like breadth and depth of their skills.
I'm sharing in the chat this case story in the Business of Handmade project that 200 Million Artisans put together. That case story, Fab Creation, it was founded by a group of young men. As you all see here in this space, it's often women having this conversation about the artisan sector. And it's a really lovely story, and you know, we're following them closely to see how they'll do moving forward. But it's a really nice example that perhaps addresses much of what we're discussing here with regards to involving younger people from the community.
I see Maria again raised her hand.
Yeah,
Maria.
thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, Cynthia answered in a chat that the biggest problem was drop in orders and the sales during the pandemic. And I was wondering, why do you think this happened? Because like lots of sales went online, and there was like increase in sales online from my experience working in this sector.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is that that during the pandemic, I mean, globally, there was loss of income across the board, right? There was a systemic, there was additional hoarding from those at the top, the billionaires and trillionaires, but otherwise loss of income generally was the trend globally. With that, then people don't buy necessarily things made by the artisan sector, which are often seen as accessories, or how Valentina framed it, new luxury. And I don't know, Valentina, if you have any specific insights from the recent interviews you've been doing.
Yeah, so I think like one of the main constraints is like a lot of like borders were closed at the beginning of the pandemic, so like they were forced to completely shut down like even their operations, because they like a lot of these communities done are located in the US or where the borders stay closed and the market was here. So that was like one factor that really affected them, but also it was really hard for even small business owners to get in touch with their communities because of the difficulty to travel to them and to even get products from there. Like here it comes back to the problem of like courier, right? Since they are like located in like conditions that are like geographically really hard to access, and at the same time like the political conditions are a little complicated in some cases, that also was deeply affected by the pandemic. And regarding other topics, like the retail industry was affected a lot by that, especially because they are like considered products that are like not first necessity, and also because people were spending more like in wellness or other categories which are not actually accessories as the majority of crafts are categorized.
I see. Thank you.
Is there someone else that wants to give more ideas? I know, like, so for example, like even in the solutions of Tanvi, like I wasn't able to like actually write what you were saying, but I do want to incorporate it here. But if you can help me write it in the chat, it will be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just do that.
Thank you. So I think Nina now is raising the hand.
Yeah, I just had one more maybe suggestion too. Like I know we were saying, obviously we don't foresee another pandemic coming, and hopefully knock on wood, and like borders closing again. But I think another thing is like a lot of people did switch to online, which is difficult for artisans if they don't already have that kind of e-commerce foundational structure in place. But I think maybe making like, instead of each artisan being responsible and kind of like, thrown to the wolves and have to make their own online thing, it could be like a community online platform. If it's a group of artisans in a village, and it could be like their village online platform, and then different places, can see it and kind of shop by the different communities. And that way, I feel like it's less risk for all of them, and they can also kind of pool their knowledge and their resources to kind of start that communal thing, or the communal online platform. But then it can also help, connect with the different people all across the world. I actually know I received an email the other day. Gosh, I forgot what it was from, but it was something. It was like a very similar concept, and it was saying like, oh, at this day, at this time, they're going to be like auctioning off artisan woven rugs, which are really beautiful. And there's some variety of artisans you can like bid on, or either you could bid on them or just buy them straight. But it was the same concept. And it was really great because like all of them was, 30 different artisan women and all of their different experiences and their bios on it. And then you can see their rugs that they were selling, and you could buy them online, and then they would ship it to you. And I thought that was a really great way to connect it, because I feel like if I didn't receive that email or know about that platform, like I don't know if I would have ever been able to find that, I guess, as a consumer, unless if I was very much like in that market looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
This is more a comment. I know, Valentina, you presented on it, but I think the importance of co-creating, because what's happening right now is the artisans do not even know how their products are being, how are they being appreciated by the customers. So the co-creating part, like actually what would happen, because I studied like this, how they moved from how they were culturally devalued, and not only culturally, but also economically. And one of the issues is that when industrialization happened, they are now suddenly being put in a production cycle rather than, oh, this is like something that you've done for generations. So not only co-creating is going to be important, but also conveying to people just how important their role is in upholding the culture of for generations that their family has. And because people are not valuing it, and because maybe the money is not trickling into them, future generations do not want to partake in it. And I don't blame them, because if they're not getting that incentive, why should they? But I guess the co-creating part, and also how can we get people to value them is definitely going to be interesting. I know Tanvi mentioned storytelling and the power of storytelling. That would be great. I talked to this organization back in India and from my city, Lucknow, and they mentioned that the more people get to know the process of what it takes, the more likely they are to spend money, because now they know. And I talked to a lot of my cohort as well, and they explained like there's a difference. So machine made is not bad. It actually helps quite a lot. But the difference is in the price, and the reason is, I think Tanvi, you mentioned that if you cut a thread in machine made, everything unravels. If you cut a thread in embroidered, it does not, because everything is a different stitch. So I think conveying just these small little things can really change the narrative to, I mean, yes, I can go for a cheaper option, but it does have some shortcomings as well.
Interesting, yeah.
Really great. Thank you, Polo. I wanted to answer Andy's question in the chat for people watching the recording so they also hear it. How about bringing the Fair Trade Federation into the conversation? Yeah, you know, just a couple of years ago, Fair Trade updated their requirements to be a fair wage. It used to be a minimum wage, which we don't believe that minimum wages are fair. And therefore, you know, it was kind of ridiculous that they were counting on a minimum wage. Anecdotally, at the gift show many years back, I think I was there with Daphne Lewenstein, who's also here today, walking through, saw a stall, fair trade certified, and these beautiful silk woven scarves were being sold for $1. And I just really question how the person who made that scarf is receiving a fair wage if at the point of sale here at the gift show it's being sold for $1. And all of the, if I think about all of the expenses of just getting to the trade show, how much is left behind? I also have read academic research that compares, for example, 2 coffee farms in Ethiopia, one fair trade, one not. The fair trade one was found to not necessarily have better conditions for the workers, for the farmers. So the last thing I'll say about this is it is expensive to get certifications such as fair trade. So already when you look at fair trade, you're buying into a certain level, which needs to then be participating in the system with intermediaries to even have the scale and the resources to seek certification, puts them. So I think the industry is primed for a new kind of certification. I'm excited by Nest's ethical handcraft certification. Still need to, they just published it a couple of years ago. We can put a link in the chat as well. Maybe that will be a good way forward, but that'll really depend on the cost, like who absorbs the costs of that certification. If it's absorbed by artisans and we're calling for artisan-led, artisan-founded organizations, are they really going to have the capital and resources to go through that certification? And then to Maria's question, platforms, marketplaces where a designer or retail owner can find artisans. I can put a couple in the chat. Global Goods Partners here in New York, that's really what they do. Annie Waterman, she went off on her own a couple of years ago, runs her own company, really making those connections. They typically look for pretty large buyers. So their clients are often stores like West Elm, or Mercado Global works with Levi's, you know, so they're looking for kind of these bulk orders that will sustain sales or income for the artisans for at least a year or so. But I'll put the links in the chat and maybe that'll be a good starting point. And I see other things are being shared here.
Okay. does anyone else have like some other ideas regarding maybe the lack of education in time management or any other of the topics we have regarding financial education?
Well, related to that, I received a question in private, so I won't disclose who shared it. Maybe they want to keep anonymity here. Are there risks associated with exposing the artisan directly to the market without adequate knowledge about the market? I mean, I guess to that, I will say that I see plenty of our alumni go straight from their studies straight into the market. You know, we kind of learn by doing, and in that way, I don't want to make assumptions about it being better or worse for an artisan to learn about the market through their own experiential learning. I think I don't know if there are risks. I know that artisans are often worried about others in neighboring communities copying their designs, and many of the companies that we've met with are also very proprietary with their own designs, so they won't let artisans keep a portfolio of their own work because they're worried that then it's going to be shared before the market learns about the product or whatever it may be. So there's those kinds of issues. Are there IP protections for artisans? There are none by default, but there are some interesting initiatives, both in Guatemala. There's this organization, Ethical Fashion Guatemala, that sought a large lawsuit of hundreds of Etsy vendors who were selling designs that were clearly ripped off from Mayan designs. And then there's a cultural intellectual property organization run by Monica, who's Hungarian. She works between Europe and India, really looking at how do we create IP frameworks for cultural knowledge. Yes, that's the CIPRI, that's the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative.
Yeah, I think like also to say a little more about that, there are like other businesses that like, sorry, I was going to say like, I just got like a question here on the chat that asked me about if we are going to share the mural link. And yes, I will be able to share the link for the participants, but I just have to organize it because we have like some previous exercise that we were doing there and I don't want to pass it in a little of a messy way. So yeah.
Yeah, we can share that out. There, we welcome more questions. Where our next La Hora will be on May 4th. And so also welcome your participation if you have any work in progress, projects that you worked on that you want to share, that you want to get feedback on, certainly let us know. Today was our kickoff, so we organized it in this way, and Tanvi reached out and was like, I'll present. So we're grateful also for Tanvi's participation, but this isn't necessarily the format. There may be sessions where we show up and we're like, what are we thinking about today? Maybe an interesting thing you just read or a person you just met is doing some exciting work that would be worth sharing. The spirit is learning and not reinventing the wheel. And I think Jennifer's question here, is there resistance within the Fair Trade Federation to correcting those inequities? I don't know. I'll look forward to maybe finding a connection into the Fair Trade Federation and speaking with them about it. Because that could be a really lovely project for us to pursue as a lab. It would really be, I would say, a systemic change, systems level change that would be, I think, could have really tremendous implications. So if you want to write to me, I'll just put my email in the chat. You can write to me directly, Cynthia@newschool.edu. We're also active on Instagram. You can send us direct message there. Daphne is sharing, Fair Trade Federation has been trying to bring in a living wage for some years. Nice to see you, Daphne. Daphne was a research assistant in the Deed Lab many years ago. We traveled together in one of our fieldwork programs.
I also left my email in the chat in case like they want to reach to both of us. Okay, thank you so much for everyone to participating in this session. It was lovely to like not only hear the inspired story of Tanvi and her work, but also to like hear how like passionate all of you are regarding the artisan sector and this topic. So I hope you guys can join us for the next month, which will be also on Wednesday. So as Cynthia mentioned, will be on the 4th and at the same time. Remember, it is a time to like share, listen, learn, and perhaps create about the artisan sector.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you, you too.